story begins with Roric and Deline, a loving couple who mysteriously vanished during a camping trip, leaving their family in the dark for 4 years. The case goes cold until a gruesome discovery is made. A logger finds Roric's remains in a rusted wood chipper, finally reopening the investigation. Roric and Deline were a couple who loved nature and enjoyed camping very much. They lived in the beautiful state of Washington and often spent their weekends hiking or camping in the forest or mountains. One day they told their son, Tyron, that they would be going on a one-night camping trip and would return home the next day. Tyron wished them a safe trip and went about his business in the city. But one day passed, then 2 days, then 3 days, and Tyron's parents still hadn't returned. Tyron began to worry and decided to drive to their house. When he arrived, he found the front door ajar and the entire house ransacked. What was even more shocking was that their pet dog, Sonny, had been brutally beaten and was near death. Tyron immediately reported it to the police and a large-scale search began. The search team found their car parked at a trail entrance, but the car was properly locked, and there were no suspicious traces. The police concluded that this was likely a simple accident and spent many months searching the area for their bodies, but found nothing. Eventually, the case went cold. 4 years later, the case was almost forgotten. But one day, a logger was working in a remote area cutting wood. He stumbled upon a rusty wood chipper that had been abandoned in the forest. Curious, he looked inside and saw some things that looked like human remains. He immediately reported it to the police. Police arrived at the scene and found a number of bone fragments inside the wood chipper. After DNA and dental tests, they confirmed that the remains belonged to Roric. This discovery reopened the cold case, and the police began their investigation from the beginning. Feeling that the police were moving too slowly, Tyron decided to conduct his own investigation. He revisited his father's old workplace and found some confidential documents that revealed Roric had discovered a massive insurance fraud scheme at Van Camp Industries, his boss's company. Realizing that his father was likely murdered because he knew this, Tyron continued to look for more evidence. While investigating, he was followed and attacked by a mysterious man. Tyron narrowly escaped the danger, but it confirmed that someone truly didn't want him to know the truth. Tyron provided all the information he had found to the police, and they began investigating Van Camp Industries. They found enough evidence to arrest Van Camp, the company owner, and his right-hand man, Pasternak. After many hours of questioning, Pasternak confessed to their crime. He explained that they had killed Roric and Deline to cover up the fraud and used the wood chipper to dispose of the evidence. He also revealed the location of Deline's body. Ultimately, Van Camp was sentenced to life in prison, while Pasternak received a slightly reduced sentence for his confession. The story seemed to be over. Tyron had received justice for his parents, but he still had a feeling that something wasn't quite finished. A week after the verdict, he received an anonymous message with only a few words. "We know what you did." The message was sent from a burner phone. Were there others involved in this? Who were they? And what did they want from Tyron? The anonymous text message, with its chilling phrase, "We know what you did," was a cold knife to Tyron's gut. The celebration of Van Camp and Pasternak's sentencing was replaced by a gnawing fear. He knew the police wouldn't take a single untraceable text seriously. This was his burden alone. Someone else was involved, someone powerful enough to monitor him even after the case was closed. He spent the next few days in a state of paranoia, checking his phone constantly and looking over his shoulder. The feeling intensified when he returned to his parents' old house, the one he was still cleaning up, and found something left on their front porch. It was a single playing card, the ace of spades. Tucked neatly beneath it was a small, crudely drawn symbol that looked like a bird's talon gripping a stack of coins. Tyron's blood ran cold. He recognized the symbol from one of the cryptic financial files his father had hidden. The symbol wasn't connected to Van Camp Industries. It was a code his father had used to label files, related to a shadowy financial group. The group's existence had been a fringe detail in the police investigation. They couldn't prove a link to the murder. Now the ace of spades and the talon symbol were a direct threat. Tyron realized his father hadn't just stumbled upon a local fraud scheme. He had uncovered a sprawling network of organized crime. With no one to turn to, Tieran began to dig deeper into the files. His father's notes led him to an abandoned storage facility on the outskirts of the city, listed as a dormant subsidiary of a defunct company linked to the fraud. The place was a ruin, its windows boarded up and its fence rusted. Tieran knew he had to go alone. He broke in under the cover of night, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, the place smelled of mildew and dust. As he crept through the dark, he saw a laptop on a desk, still plugged into a power source. He managed to boot it up, and what he saw made his hands tremble. It was a series of encrypted files containing names, dates and account numbers, hundreds of them. It was a ledger of the entire criminal network. Just as he began to copy the files onto a USB drive, a floorboard creaked somewhere behind him. He froze, listening. The sound came again, closer this time. He wasn't alone. Tieran's breath hitched in his throat. He wasn't alone. The sound of the floorboard was followed by a soft, deliberate footstep. He slammed the laptop shut, his fingers fumbling to pull out the USB drive. He clutched it tight and dove behind, a stack of crates just as a flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, sweeping across the empty desk where he had been. "I know you're here," a low, gravelly voice said. Tieran's mind raced. He scurried on his hands and knees. The sound of his own, heavy breathing, lost in the silence of the warehouse. He saw a narrow opening between two large shipping containers and squeezed through, emerging on the other side of the building. The flashlight beam danced wildly, illuminating dust motes in the air as his pursuer moved with surprising speed. He spotted a small, unbarred window near the ground. It was old and covered in grime, but it was his only way out. He scrambled toward it, pushing a crate out of the way. He could hear the footsteps getting closer, a frantic urgency in their pace. With a surge of adrenaline, he shoved himself through the window, scraping his skin on the broken glass. He hit the ground outside in a clumsy roll, ignoring the pain. As he sprinted for his car, he glanced back. The beam of the flashlight was shining out of the window. For a second, a face was illuminated in its pale glow. A man with a cruel, thin mouth and eyes as cold as stone. He hadn't gotten a good look, but he knew the man had seen him. The anonymity was gone. Safe in his car, heart pounding, Tieran stared at the USB drive in his hand. He had the information, but it was encrypted and useless. He couldn't go to the police now. He was no longer a civilian with a hunch. He was an active target. He had to decode the files himself, but he was no expert. There was only one person he knew who could help. He drove to a small house in the suburbs and knocked on the door. It was opened by a man in his late 60s with a kind, tired face. Ken, his father's old friend and a former military IT specialist. Tieran explained everything, his voice trembling. He showed him the USB drive and the message on his phone. Ken listened patiently, then nodded gravely. "Your father trusted me with things like this. But if they're watching you, they'll be watching me now, too." He took the USB and led Tieran to a back room filled with old computers. "This isn't just a fraud case anymore, Tieran. This is a game of cat and mouse. And we just became the mice." Ken led Tieran to a small, cluttered office in his basement, the walls lined with monitors and computer towers. "This is going to take time," he said, connecting the USB drive. "Your father used an old military-grade encryption. It's designed to withstand brute force attacks." Tieran watched anxiously as lines of code filled the screen. Every passing second felt like a lifetime, the memory of the cold-eyed man from the warehouse burning in his mind. As Ken worked, he set up a few basic scanners to monitor their surroundings. An hour went by, then two. The basement was quiet except for the hum of the computers and the frantic clicking of Ken's keyboard. Then a small red light on one of the monitors began to blink. Ken's eyes narrowed. "Someone's running a scan on the house's network. They're trying to find us." A cold sweat broke out on Tieran's brow. "Can you stop them?" "Too late," Ken muttered, his fingers flying across the keys. "They've already found us. They're just figuring out how to get in without alerting the authorities." He pulled up a map on another screen, showing a small dot moving slowly toward the house. "He's here." Just as a loud bang echoed from the front door, a pop-up appeared on Ken's main monitor. "Got it!" he yelled, his voice a mix of triumph and fear. He had found the decryption key. With a final command, the encrypted files on the USB drive unlocked. Tieran pulled up the files, his eyes widening. It wasn't just a simple ledger. It was a detailed list of dozens of people, all high-ranking officials, police officers, judges, and even a handful of state senators. The criminal network wasn't just a small-time fraud ring, it was a powerful organization deeply embedded in the government. This was why the original investigation had been a dead end. "They're coming through the door," Ken said, his face pale. "We have to go now." They grabbed the USB drive and ran, scrambling up the basement stairs. The sound of splintering wood and angry voices filled the house. As Tyrion and Ken bolted out the back door and into the darkness of the yard, they heard footsteps right behind them. They were out of time. Tyrion and Ken scrambled into Ken's car, its tires spinning on the gravel, as a black SUV screeched to a halt in front of the house. The men inside were already getting out, but Ken sped away, the tires squealing as he rounded the corner. "We can't go home," Ken said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "And we can't go to the local authorities. The list proves they're compromised." Tyrion's mind raced. He had an idea, a distant memory from his childhood. "I know a place. A fishing cabin. My dad owned it. A small off-the-grid place he used to escape to. No one else knows about it." Ken didn't hesitate. He drove for hours deeper into the countryside, away from the city's glow and into the dense forest. They arrived at the cabin just before dawn, a small, rustic structure hidden by tall pines. It felt like a ghost from Tyrion's past, a place full of happy memories now serving as a refuge from a nightmare. Inside, they were finally able to catch their breath. Ken immediately began to analyze the encrypted files. The true extent of the conspiracy laid bare before them. It wasn't just a handful of crooked officials. It was a deeply ingrained network, using the insurance fraud as a front for even larger criminal activities. The discovery was staggering, but they had to figure out how to use the information without getting themselves killed. "We need to get this to someone outside their reach," Tyrion said. "A journalist? An FBI agent?" "The FBI has local field offices," Ken replied, his eyes scanning a name on the list. "They could be compromised too. But your father had a friend, an old military buddy who went into federal service, a man named Agent Carter. He worked for a special division. Your dad trusted him completely." Just as a flicker of hope appeared, a low, persistent humming sound began to grow in the distance. Tyrion and Ken looked at each other, their faces filled with dread. The sound grew louder, a mechanical buzz that cut through the silence of the woods. It was a drone. The small, dark shape appeared above the tree line, its camera lens pointing directly at the cabin. The criminal network wasn't just relying on muscle anymore. They were using advanced technology to track their targets. They had found them even in this remote location. "They've found us," Tyrion said, his voice barely a whisper. "What do we do now?" Ken didn't hesitate. "Inside now," he commanded, pulling Tyrion back into the cabin. He grabbed a small metallic device from his bag, a powerful signal jammer. As the drone hovered above, its buzzing growing louder, Ken flicked a switch. The device pulsed with a faint blue light, and a static-like scramble appeared on a small screen. The drone's buzzing changed pitch, becoming erratic for a moment before it veered away and out of sight. "It won't last long," Ken said, already moving toward the door. "It's a temporary disruption. They'll find a way to re-establish the feed. We need to go." They sprinted back to the car and drove even faster, leaving the remote cabin and its false sense of security behind. They drove for another 2 hours until they reached a small, quiet town, a place far enough away to feel safe. They pulled into a gas station. "Stay in the car," Ken instructed. "I'll make the call from the payphone. Less chance of them tracking the signal." Tyrion watched anxiously as Ken walked to the payphone, his back to the road. He dialed a number, his posture tense. After a few agonizing moments, he began to speak in hushed, clipped tones. "Agent Carter? It's Ken. I'm calling about Roric." "Yes, his son. We found something, a list. I need you to listen to a code word only." Roric would have known a Blue Phoenix. Tyrion's heart pounded. He knew Blue Phoenix was the code name his father and Ken had for their top-secret missions. Ken paused, listening to Carter's response. A flicker of relief crossed his face. He nodded and began to explain the situation, setting up a meeting point in a nearby city. Tyrion let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. They had made contact. Just as Ken was about to hang up, a black SUV pulled into the gas station. It was the same one from his house. The man with the cold, stone-like eyes from the warehouse was in the passenger seat, staring directly at their car. Tyrion instinctively ducked down, his hand flying to the small gun he'd found in his father's old study. Ken turned, his eyes locking with the man's. He didn't have time to run. The man's cruel, thin mouth spread into a slow, satisfied smile. Tiran and Ken were cornered. They were out of options and time was up. The gas station felt like a death trap. The black SUV was a blockade, and the man with the stone eyes was a predator closing in on his prey. As two more men emerged from the vehicle, Tiran's mind raced, his hand on the gun in his jacket. This wasn't a time for courage. It was a time for chaos. "Ken, the fire extinguisher!" Tiran yelled, his voice strained. He grabbed a canister from a wall and aimed it at a large display of flammable engine oil bottles. The foam shot out, hitting the display and creating a slippery, white cloud that spread across the ground. The thugs hesitated, slipping on the slick surface. It was the distraction they needed. Tiran ran towards a car parked nearby, while Ken, with his military training, used a crate to launch himself over a low wall. Just as the men regained their footing and started to move, the sound of multiple sirens filled the air. A convoy of unmarked SUVs, sirens wailing, screeched to a halt, surrounding the black SUV. The doors of the federal vehicles flew open, and a dozen armed agents, led by Agent Carter, swarmed the area. The criminals, caught completely by surprise, were disarmed and forced to the ground. The man with the cold eyes locked his gaze on Tiran one last time before being cuffed and led away. Agent Carter walked over to Tiran, his face a mixture of grim satisfaction and relief. Ken's call was just enough. He gave us the code word and the general location. We got here as fast as we could. He looked at the gas station, at the scene of the chaos. Looks like we were just in time. With the criminals in custody, the evidence on the USB drive was verified. The information Tiran's father had gathered was a detailed roadmap of the criminal network, leading to a cascade of arrests across the state. The corrupt officials, the crooked judges, and the man who had ordered the murder of Roric and Deline were all brought to justice. Months later, the story of the Washington couple's disappearance and the subsequent exposure of the powerful criminal network was national news. Tiran, his role in the investigation kept mostly secret, finally had peace. He stood in a field of wildflowers, a place his parents loved, looking at the sky. Subscribe for more. I hope you enjoy this story.